He thought it would be a cruel joke, a millionaire daring a waitress to dance at a gala. But when Monica Reed stepped onto that floor, the crowd didn't laugh. They roared. The first thing anyone noticed that night wasn't the chandeliers, the marble floor, or even the smell of wine drifting through the Charleston ballroom. It was the sound of laughter, loud, sharp, and cutting across the music like glass breaking. Heads turned, but no one was surprised when the source was revealed. Preston Caldwell, a man who carried his wealth on his shoulders like a badge and never let anyone forget it. At 42, Preston had everything money could buy: a tailored tuxedo that fit like armor, a gold watch that caught every glimmer of light, and a glass of champagne he hadn't once paid attention to because the real drink he enjoyed was attention itself. He leaned back in his chair, surrounded by friends in crisp suits and glittering gowns, grinning like the entire gala was his private stage. Across the room, weaving between tables, was Monica Reed, 29 years old, balancing a silver tray in her hand, moving carefully through the crowd as though the glassware she carried was heavier than it looked. Monica wasn't born into the world of crystal chandeliers and tuxedos. She was there because she needed the paycheck. Tuition at the College of Charleston didn't pay itself, and her 2 jobs already left her with little sleep. But as she moved past Preston's table, he locked eyes on her the way a cat watches a bird it doesn't take seriously. His smirk deepened. "Hey!" Preston called, his voice carrying just enough to turn the heads of nearby guests. "Don't rush off. Come here." Monica paused. Her polite smile didn't falter, though she had heard that tone before. The one that made her bristle inside. The one that reminded her of all the nights she had to keep her cool in the face of people who thought a waitress was fair game for their jokes. Still, she walked closer. "Yes, sir?" she asked evenly. Preston twirled the stem of his champagne glass and tilted his head toward the band, which had just started a fast, playful number. Saxophones and drums filled the ballroom, giving the air a spark of energy. "You've been gliding around here all night like you're on a runway," Preston said, loud enough for his table to chuckle. "Why don't you show us some moves? Think you can keep up with this rhythm?" The men at his table laughed. One woman hid her mouth behind her hand, but giggled anyway. Preston leaned back, satisfied with himself, eyes glinting like he'd just tossed down a winning card. Monica felt the sting immediately. It wasn't a request. It was a dare, a jab dressed up as entertainment. She could have turned away. She could have pretended she didn't hear. But there was something in Preston's tone, something about the way his friend's laughter echoed, that planted her feet firmly on the spot. Her smile widened just a fraction. "Is that right?" she said, her voice steady. "You want me to dance?" Preston raised his brows, pretending to be amused. "If you're brave enough." There it was, the challenge, the insult hidden inside. For a moment, Monica thought of her bills waiting at home, the textbooks stacked by her bedside, the way her mother had always told her not to let anyone reduce her worth to their joke. She looked at the band. The drummer had noticed the exchange, his sticks pausing mid-air. The trumpet player raised a brow as if to ask silently, "Are you really going to do this?" The tray in Monica's hand felt heavy, but not nearly as heavy as the silence now circling the table. Slowly, she lowered it onto a nearby stand. She took one breath, then another. Her eyes returned to Preston, who still wore that crooked smile that begged to be wiped away. "All right," she said softly, her tone calm enough to make a few people lean in closer. "Let's see if the rhythm will keep up with me." That answer hit the table harder than the drums ever could. A couple of guests at nearby tables stopped their conversations. The band members exchanged quick glances. Even Preston's grin wavered for a split second, as though he hadn't expected her to accept. But she had. And now, there was no going back. But the moment she stepped away from that tray and onto the ballroom floor, the entire night began shifting into something no one there would ever forget. The ballroom didn't fall silent, but something in the air tightened. The chatter quieted to a hum. Silverware paused mid-air, and the music took on new weight, like everyone was waiting to see if Monica Reed was serious. Servers at the back leaned forward slightly, curious. Guests in gowns angled their chairs, sensing the tension. Preston Caldwell thrived on that kind of attention. His smirk returned, though this time it was laced with a trace of disbelief. He leaned back further in his chair, stretching an arm across the seat beside him, as if to remind everyone he was in control. "You're actually going to do this?" he asked, raising his voice enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Careful now. Don't embarrass yourself." Monica stood a few feet away from his table, her hands free now that the tray was resting safely on its stand. She didn't move immediately. Instead, she looked at Preston directly. Her expression wasn't angry, not even defiant. It was steady, almost serene. "If I embarrass anyone tonight," she replied, "it won't be me." The words hit like a dart. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. One of Preston's friends gave a low whistle, while another laughed nervously, as though unsure whose side to take. The band leader, a tall man with graying hair and a clarinet in hand, caught Monica's gaze. His eyes flickered with interest, and without a word, he gave a nod to the drummer. The beat grew sharper, steadier, as though laying down a stage just for her. Preston chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't the same confident laugh as before. "All right then," he said, gesturing toward the open space in the center of the room. "Show us what you've got." Monica walked to the edge of the dance floor. Each step seemed to pull more eyes toward her. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She moved with the quiet control of someone who had made up her mind long before anyone else realized it. Behind her, Preston's table whispered. One of the women leaned in close to him and murmured, "She's not really going to dance in front of everyone, is she?" "Oh, she is," Preston said, a smug grin pulling at his mouth again. "And it's going to be a disaster." But he said it too quickly, almost as though he needed to convince himself. Monica reached the middle of the floor. She glanced at the band, then back at the crowd. A dozen phones had already been lifted discreetly, their screens glowing in the low light. She could feel the weight of those lenses, the judgment waiting to pounce. She closed her eyes for a second, long enough to summon something she hadn't touched in years. Memories of late nights in a small community studio came rushing back. Bare feet on scuffed wooden floors, music pulsing through her veins, her body moving without permission. Dance had once been her world before reality pulled her in other directions. Now in a ballroom full of strangers, that old world called her name again. The drummer snapped his sticks together, setting the tempo. Monica opened her eyes and let her body respond. Her first step was simple, almost cautious, but clean. The rhythm carried her second, then her third, until her arms began to move in sync with the horns, and her body flowed like the music itself had found its vessel. The crowd leaned in. "She's actually good," someone whispered near Preston's table. His jaw tightened, though he kept his forced grin in place. He lifted his glass to his lips, sipping without tasting, eyes locked on Monica, as if trying to figure out what trick she was playing. Monica spun once, her dress catching the air. She didn't overdo it. She didn't need to. Each move was precise, deliberate, and smooth. She knew exactly where her feet were landing, exactly when to extend her arms, exactly how to turn the band's rhythm into something visible. The room shifted from curiosity to awe in a matter of seconds. Even the servers had stopped moving, trays balanced awkwardly as they tried to watch without getting caught. Preston's laughter had dried up. The grin faded slowly, replaced by something else, an expression most of the room had never seen on him before. Uncertainty. His friend leaned over, whispering, "I thought you said she couldn't do it." Preston didn't answer. Meanwhile, Monica let the beat guide her, letting the tension drain out of her limbs and replacing it with energy she had been holding back all evening. The dance wasn't just movement. It was a statement, and everyone knew it. But as the music picked up and the crowd's cheers grew louder, what began as Preston's joke was turning into something far more dangerous for his pride. The opening steps were enough to grab attention, but what came next turned the ballroom into something else entirely. Monica Reed wasn't simply moving to the beat anymore. She was commanding it. Her body seemed to know exactly when the saxophone would wail, when the trumpet would punch through, when the drummer's sticks would crack against the rim. Each note met a movement, and each movement told a story. At first, the audience clapped politely, the way guests at a gala acknowledge an unexpected performance, but the longer Monica stayed on the floor, the more the energy in the room shifted. People who had been mid-conversation stopped speaking altogether. Women leaned forward with their glasses frozen in midair, eyes widening at the grace in her spins. Men who had smirked at Preston's dare began tapping their feet along with her. The polite clapping became louder, sharper, and the sound bounced off the marble floor until it filled every corner of the ballroom. Preston, seated like a king who'd been challenged, forced his grin back onto his face. He didn't clap. He didn't move. His glass stayed halfway raised, as if he couldn't decide whether to toast or throw it. Monica didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone, really. Her eyes flickered between the band and the empty space in front of her, as if the entire room had vanished except for the rhythm and the floor beneath her feet. The band noticed. The clarinet player stepped forward, adding a playful run that wasn't part of the original arrangement. The drummer grinned, shoulders bouncing as he leaned into the beat harder than before. Even the pianist started improvising, giving Monica a rhythm that pulsed with life. It wasn't just her dancing anymore. The band was performing with her, and she matched them effortlessly. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered from a table near the back. "That girl can move." A burst of applause followed, then phones began to rise higher. Guests weren't just watching now, they were recording. The blue glow of screens scattered across the room like fireflies, capturing every twist of her hips, every flick of her wrist, every glide across the floor. Monica's heart hammered in her chest, but it wasn't from nerves anymore. It was from the surge of energy rising from the crowd. She hadn't felt this alive in years, back when she used to dance with her small troupe on King Street, when weekends meant rehearsals instead of shifts, when she still thought maybe, just maybe, her future could include something more than tuition bills and late-night work. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't a waitress in a borrowed uniform. She was Monica Reed, a dancer, and every eye in the room was hers. Preston felt that shift more than anyone. His friends had stopped laughing. One of them, a man with thinning blonde hair and a crooked tie, muttered, "She's making you look..." He cut himself off quickly, realizing Preston's glare was sharper than any words he could offer. But Preston could see it. He could feel it. The attention wasn't his anymore. The spotlight had left his table and landed squarely on the woman he had tried to humiliate. And she was soaking it in, turning every second into something unforgettable. Monica lifted her arms high, spun once, and let the music guide her into a dip that had the crowd roaring. A woman in a sequined gown stood up, clapping above her head. Others followed. The ballroom, once polite and orderly, had turned into an audience. Preston shifted in his chair, his smugness unraveling bit by bit. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, though no one at his table responded. They were too busy watching. Monica heard none of it. She didn't need to. Her movements were doing the talking for her. Every step said what words couldn't. She wouldn't be mocked. She wouldn't be reduced. And she certainly wouldn't be made small by a man who thought money gave him the right to laugh at her. The song carried on, faster now, the trumpet screaming as if daring her to keep pace. And she did. Her feet slid, her arms cut through the air, her body curved and snapped with precision. The crowd gasped and cheered, swept into the rhythm she controlled. Then, in one fluid motion, she ended with a final spin, landing perfectly in time with the last crash of the cymbals. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the room, echoing up into the chandeliers. Guests stood to their feet, clapping and shouting her name as though she had been the headliner of the night. Phones flashed, cheers echoed, and the energy refused to die down. For a moment, Monica just stood there, chest rising and falling, her hair clinging slightly to her face. She didn't bow, shoo. She didn't need to. The applause spoke for itself, and at his table, Preston Caldwell sat frozen, his smirk gone entirely. His champagne glass trembled slightly in his hand. The joke he thought would make him look clever had turned him invisible. But Monica hadn't just stolen the spotlight. She had rewritten the entire evening, and everyone knew it wasn't over yet. The standing ovation didn't die down quickly. It carried wave after wave until it felt less like polite applause and more like something alive. The sound filled the grand ballroom, bouncing against the tall windows and polished marble, soaking into the velvet curtains. For a moment, the gala wasn't about donors, politicians, or real estate tycoons. It was about Monica Reed, a waitress who had dared to accept a challenge meant to humiliate her, and turned it into her triumph. The band was still buzzing with adrenaline. The clarinet player grinned, bowing his head at her. The drummer twirled his sticks before resting them across the snare, giving her a playful salute. Even the pianist mouthed the word "wow" as she stepped back from the dance floor, chest rising and falling. But the real story wasn't the music. It was the crowd. Guests who had spent the evening sipping fine champagne and discussing business now leaned forward like children at a magic show. A woman in pearls clutched her husband's arm and whispered, "Did you see that?" A group of younger guests near the back had pulled their phones higher, panning across the room, capturing Monica as though she were a star on tour. And yet, in the middle of it all, one man couldn't celebrate. Preston Caldwell sat stiffly at his table, his glass of champagne still clutched in his hand. His grin had vanished completely, replaced with a tight line across his lips. His friends avoided looking at him, their earlier laughter turning into awkward silence. One man cleared his throat. Another adjusted his tie and murmured something about needing fresh air. Preston leaned forward, lowering his glass, his voice sharp. "What are you all staring at?" "She danced. Big deal." No one answered. Monica, meanwhile, returned to the edge of the floor, but she wasn't the same woman who had set down her tray minutes earlier. She walked taller, shoulders squared, as if the applause itself had lifted her an inch off the ground. She gave a small, polite smile toward the crowd, but there was no need for modesty. Her performance had already spoken louder than words. A man near the front table called out, "That was the best thing this gala's seen in years." Cheers followed, adding more fuel to the fire. Monica felt her cheeks warm, but she refused to shrink back. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. The band leader leaned toward his microphone, his voice warm and booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give another round of applause for Miss..." He paused, glancing at Monica for her name. "Reed," she said, her voice carrying clearly enough to be heard. "Monica Reed." The band leader grinned. "For Miss Monica Reed." The crowd roared again. Preston gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. He hadn't expected this. In his world, money dictated power. A dare was supposed to put someone like Monica in their place, remind her where she stood in the hierarchy. But the hierarchy had flipped, and it was his arrogance, now exposed under the ballroom lights. One of the women at his table leaned closer to him. "Preston, maybe just let it go. Everyone loved it." "Loved it," he repeated, his voice edged with disbelief. "She's a waitress. She doesn't belong on that floor." The woman's eyes narrowed. "She belonged more than you did tonight." That stung. He turned away from her, glaring into his champagne as if the bubbles might offer him a way to rewind the last 15 minutes. Monica caught his expression as she passed by, heading toward her tray again. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just looked at him with a calm steadiness that said she didn't need to. That look unsettled him more than anything. Around the room, conversations buzzed with Monica's name. Guests speculated about whether she'd trained professionally. Some insisted she must have been a performer before. A few joked about hiring her for their own events. And through it all, Preston faded further into the background, his reputation shrinking with every whispered word. The gala had begun as his stage. Now it was hers. But Preston Caldwell wasn't the kind of man to surrender gracefully. He leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. His pride wouldn't let it be. But as Monica returned to her work, carrying herself with quiet triumph, the crowd made one thing clear. The balance of the night had shifted, and Preston would have to decide whether to swallow his pride or let it consume him. When the applause finally quieted, the room tried to return to its polished rhythm. Silverware clinking, glasses refilled, conversations restarted, but it wasn't the same as before. Something had cracked open. The center of the gala wasn't the silent auction tables or the guest of honor anymore. It was Monica Reed. She slipped back to her tray with the same grace she'd carried on the floor, but now people looked at her differently. Guests who hadn't noticed her presence all night suddenly smiled when she passed. One older gentleman reached out and touched her arm lightly as she placed the glass down. "You made this gala worth attending," he whispered, his eyes shining. "Thank you," Monica said softly, her voice calm, though her pulse was still racing. But not everyone was charmed. Preston Caldwell hadn't moved much since the performance. He sat hunched forward, his elbows on the table, staring at the untouched champagne in front of him. His friends had shifted uncomfortably, their attempts at small talk failing under the weight of his silence. The man who had been the loudest earlier now chewed on an olive, saying nothing. Finally, Preston pushed his chair back, the scrape of it across the floor sharp enough to draw attention. He stood, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with deliberate precision, and made his way toward Monica. Conversations quieted again, not fully, but enough. People wanted to hear what he would say. Monica sensed his approach before she saw him. She kept her posture relaxed, her tray balanced neatly, and when Preston reached her, she turned with the same polite smile she gave every guest. "Mr. Caldwell," she said evenly. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You certainly enjoyed yourself out there." I did, she replied. The music was too good to ignore. Preston tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. You realize this is a gala, not some street corner showcase. His tone was sharp, meant to cut. People come here to donate, to network, to enjoy an evening, not to watch staff put on a performance. Monica didn't flinch. She adjusted a glass on her tray and met his gaze. People seemed to enjoy it. They were humoring you, Preston shot back. His voice rose a little, enough for those nearby to catch every word. It was a sideshow, nothing more. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Guests shifted in their seats. Some frowned at him. Others looked at Monica with sympathy. The woman in pearls who had cheered earlier spoke up from across the floor, her voice loud and firm. That wasn't a sideshow, Preston. That was the best thing this room has seen in years. Preston's jaw tightened. He glanced at her, but quickly turned back to Monica. You got lucky, he said, leaning in closer. But luck runs out. Remember that. Monica didn't move back. Her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. It wasn't luck. It was work. Work I've been doing long before tonight. The bluntness of her response struck deeper than any insult could. Preston blinked, as if unused to someone pushing back without raising their voice. A guest at the next table chuckled under his breath, and soon a few others followed. The sound wasn't loud, but it spread quickly, laughter at Preston's expense. The redness in his face deepened. He straightened his jacket again, glancing around as though searching for a way to claw back his authority. Well, he said finally, forcing his voice into something light. I suppose every gala needs entertainment. But no one laughed with him. The silence was pointed this time, deliberate. Monica gave a small professional smile, as though closing the exchange. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work. She turned, stepping smoothly toward another table, her tray balanced perfectly. The crowd's eyes followed her, not him. Preston remained standing a moment too long, the weight of humiliation pressing against his chest. He finally sat down again, but his throne had shrunk into an ordinary chair. His tablemates avoided eye contact. One whispered to another, he should have left it alone. Preston heard it. He clenched his fists under the table, furious. He had meant to put Monica Reed in her place. Instead, she had revealed his, but as Preston stewed in silence, Monica's quiet dignity spread through the ballroom, and soon the question on everyone's lips wasn't about him anymore. It was about what doors might open for her next. By the time dessert trays rolled out, the gala no longer felt like the same event. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had begun as a polished evening of donors and handshakes had turned into something more electric, something unpredictable. People leaned across tables, whispering Monica's name like she'd been a planned feature on the program. She didn't seek the attention. She carried on with her shift, weaving between tables with her tray as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Guests who had earlier treated her like part of the scenery now greeted her with nods and compliments. One woman reached out as Monica set down a plate of cheesecake. My dear, that was extraordinary, she said, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. You must let me introduce you to my daughter. She teaches at the Charleston School of Ballet. Monica smiled politely. Thank you. I'd love to meet her sometime. Moments later, another guest, a city councilman with a deep baritone voice, called her over. If you ever want to talk about putting together a performance for one of our summer events, let me know. The city could use talent like yours. The offers came quietly, tucked between clinking glasses and polite applause for the evening's official speakers, but Monica could feel them stacking, one on top of another, as if doors she'd long thought shut were suddenly cracking open. Meanwhile, Preston Caldwell sat at his table, barely touching his food. His friends avoided eye contact, too aware of the spotlight he had lost. Every time Monica's name surfaced in conversation nearby, his jaw tightened a little more. He leaned toward the blonde man beside him. They're treating her like she's the star of the show. It's ridiculous. The man didn't respond at first. Then carefully, he said, Well, Preston, she did outshine you. You kind of handed her the stage. Preston's glare was sharp enough to end the conversation. He turned away, seething quietly, while laughter and applause continued to ripple across the ballroom, none of it for him. Monica carried on, steady as ever. She paused near the bandstand, and the clarinet player leaned down toward her. You ever think about doing this full-time again? He asked, his eyes bright with genuine curiosity. Monica hesitated. It had been years since she'd thought about that question. I used to, she admitted softly. But life doesn't always make room for it. He gave a small grin. Maybe it does now. She walked away with those words echoing in her head. Maybe it does now. A group of younger guests approached her next, their phones still in hand. Miss Reed, you're going to be everywhere by tomorrow, one of them said excitedly. We got the whole thing on video. TikTok, Instagram, you name it. People will love it. Monica gave a half laugh. Let's hope my boss doesn't mind. Across the room, the gala's event coordinator, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard in hand, raised her glass discreetly toward Monica. It wasn't disapproval. It was respect. And that respect spread. Wherever she went, guests greeted her not as the help, but as the woman who had just breathed life into an event that until then had been predictable. She was no longer invisible. Preston, though, couldn't escape his own invisibility. For the first time in years, he wasn't the center of attention. He shifted in his seat, his mind scrambling for ways to reassert control, maybe a loud donation, a speech. But each time he opened his mouth, another burst of applause for Monica drowned him out. At one point, when Monica passed near his table again, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Enjoy your 15 minutes. She glanced at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes 15 minutes can change everything," she replied and kept walking. His face flushed crimson. The words spread quickly. A man at a nearby table repeated them to his wife. Soon they echoed around the room like a proverb. Sometimes 15 minutes can change everything. Monica didn't mean for it to become a lesson, but it did. People whispered it with a kind of admiration, as though her grace and confidence had given the entire gala something to think about. By the time the evening's keynote speaker took the stage, Preston was all but forgotten. The ballroom's true story wasn't about the charity, the speeches, or the silent auction. It was about the waitress who had danced when dared, and the millionaire who had underestimated her. And while Preston sank deeper into his seat, Monica kept working, her tray balanced perfectly, her heart still thundering, not from nerves anymore, but from the sense that her life had shifted, even if just by an inch. But as the final hours of the gala approached, it became clear the night wouldn't end without one last turning point, a moment that would seal the lesson forever. By the time the clock edged toward midnight, the chandeliers still glittered, but the mood of the ballroom had entirely changed. The silent auction tables had been cleared, the speeches were over, and the band was packing up their instruments.